Think you know everything about parcel shipping? Think again. This is ProShip ParcelCast, the only podcast hyper-focused on parcel shipping for supply chain and IT professionals in the retail, e-commerce, manufacturing, third-party logistics, and healthcare industries. Welcome to today's episode.
Welcome, everybody, to the 27th episode of the ProShip ParcelCast. I'm your host, Justin Cramer, co-founder of ProShip, and with me today is Jeff Lukaszewski and Cody Remmel. Jeff, you mind introducing yourself?
Hello, I'm Jeff Lukaszewski, Director of R&D here at ProShip. I've been at ProShip for 13 years.
And Cody, can we get you to introduce yourself?
I'm Cody Remmel, Chief Architect with ProShip. I've been here for a little bit longer than Jeff, 13 years in June.
All right, many of our listeners already know who I am, Justin Cramer, co-founder of ProShip. We won't talk about how long I've been here, just that I've had the opportunity to sell, design, and deploy large shipping software solutions across multiple continents. Let's get to the good stuff. Today, we are going to talk about 4 different points. We're going to talk about artificial intelligence. We're going to talk about OAuth and OIDC. We'll talk a bit about carrier technology and architecture. We'll have a couple of final thoughts before our closing remarks. So with that, let's just jump right in with artificial intelligence. The first question goes to Jeff. Jeff, is AI or the GPTs out there going to replace us?
I don't think so. I know that everyone's worried about AI taking over, but I foresee it being more of a tool to augment what we're already doing. You know, just there's some interesting things that I've seen with research where it's starting to grow. They had the chat GPT that they trained it to pass the bar. So, you know, it can do legal. So I think at that point in time, I think LegalZoom had some stock issues. Their stock dropped. It's recovered since then. But I think you're going to see some tools out there that can replace some of the already existing technology out there and make it easier for people to do it. So instead of you hiring LegalZoom, you can just, you know, open up the chat GPT that does legal and ask it to create a living will, create a power of attorney document. So I can see it being useful for those type of things, to help the everyday person be able to fill out a legal document that they may otherwise, you know, had to pay someone else to do or more complicated.
I think I agree on some of that. I don't think it'll replace me personally. Maybe you, Jeff. But when it comes to these services, definitely where the value is, as a tool, it's amazing. I'd love to hope, though, that it will maybe increase the market for things that are produced by people. It's one of those areas where, like, you know, you think about movies and, you know, not just, you know, it's AI in general. Large language models are great. What it's doing with music is insane. What it's doing with story writing and storytelling is insane. And the people in those industries are going to initially suffer for it, unfortunately. But you know, it's maybe it will increase the market for live theater.
I'm interested in how the copyright of those things, you know, will take into account where it's specifically for music, right? So I think I was listening to a podcast and talking about Grimes, who dated Elon Musk for a while. You know, they're asking her, well, what do you think about AI music that's based on, you know, that uses your voice for a different song? And she's just like, as long as I get a cut of it, I'm okay. So, you know.
Yeah, well, there is a lot of useful things within the GPTs and AI, especially the large language models, but they're really no better than the models that they're trained off of, which is why, as we saw in GPT-3 from OpenAI, there was a lot more errors and weirdness because, well, humans put a lot of weird stuff on the internet, and it's just trying to predict what we want to hear, right? Mm-hmm. And so some of the feedback models that they're using with GPT-4, I thought was really interesting, where GPT-4 is a version of GPT-4 is providing feedback to the running version of GPT-4 in order to help filter out some of the more odd responses that it may have found to train its model with. But then again, we've started to look a little bit about this as well. One of the great things is that because the GPTs that we're seeing now are so great at actual filling in the human details, that especially, gentlemen, the three of us are very good at speaking in a very direct fashion with words that have very specific meanings to us, meanings that not everybody may understand. Those GPT models are doing a much better job of expanding on those meetings, making it such that new employees, new hires, people new to a specific industry may get alternate language which assists them in learning that industry specifically faster. I know that's one of the things that I'm looking at with leveraging like a Llama model and injecting our own, a Llama platform and injecting our own information in order to help us answer questions faster and more accurately, but more importantly, to bring engineers, salespeople, and other people within ProShip on board faster, rather than just hoping that they actually understand, what is a very esoteric and very compressed response that we as a group may provide to somebody. It's just simple. It's reentrant, distributed, yada yada. And we say this short sentence, which to us equates to several volumes and 10 years of information. Cody?
Yeah, and never minding, just the implications of that. Like you think of like, okay, here's a new programming language, and it's a higher level programming language than we ever invented before. And what we usually mean by higher level is, you're using closer to human grammar to describe your intent to the application. And we've now gotten to the point where some of these models allow us to provide truly human grammar to things, and to such an extent that people talk about prompters for AI as a potential new job title. It's crazy.
The other thing on top of it is interesting is the answers. If you have a human that's responding to questions, they get fatigued, they forget details. It's the person at the beginning of their day answering questions compared to them 8 hours later answering the same questions. Their responses might be different. They might be shorter. They might be missing information. They might, like, logic jumps. There was another article about, as the world is today, people use a lot more either phone or online help for assistance for answering medical questions using physicians. And they had a group of questions that they asked a ChatGPT bot, for medicals that they had, so they could compare the physician's answers versus Chat AI answers. And they preferred the chatbot's responses almost 70% of the time, because they had more empathy, they were more detailed, they had more content. Think about it, a human, if you're sitting there answering the same questions over and over and over and over, it's just another tool. But it's interesting to see where that's going to take, so because you still need the people to feed that information to those models, right? You still need the information that comes from someone has to train that, someone has to go with that. But I could see LegalZoom, even for education, those type of things, I could see chatbots being utilized for that more than humans, because just accuracy and the split, and it's easier to use, it's more accurate, and it's better direction.
You think about, like, for these industries, medical, legal, you consider a certain point, a certain level of doneness, and you consider this is good enough. And especially when it comes to things like medical, we're like, that doctor's dealing with patients directly behind closed doors, and this is a good enough answer to your question. Well, maybe in the face of, this other possible answer, more, a higher standard will be set for the people behind these industries as well. Clearly, as time progresses, the machine learning is going to get better and better, and many of these things will be automated. But some industries, the professionals need this, not catalyst, but just this little nudge to do maybe a bit more than they used to for the people.
Yeah, bedside manner is what comes to mind when Jeff was talking about that, and I realized it applies to the three of us, right? Do we really want to explain what a shipper is again? Are we really going to provide the level of depth necessary for somebody new to the industry to get all the nuances that we know about the term shipper? Whereas the GPTs, the large language model execution devices, they're going to be infinitely patient. They don't have a European concern that they have to deal with, or another technical concern or a personnel concern. They don't have any of those other details that they have to work with. So it becomes a lot better and a lot easier to do that. But let's look at something closer to home for the three of us and some of our listeners. We do know that AI has come to our software engineering realm. Can you guys tell me a little bit more about some of the AIs that have dropped into the software engineering world?
Cody, I think you should take this one because I think you were showing us off Copilot.
Definitely. No, yeah, ChatGPT on its own does amazingly well with code. I poked around a little bit with it, both 3.5 and 4. Copilot is almost as amazing in Copilot X, which is going to be running it under the hood, going to be running ChatGPT under the hood. The potential there is really, really amazing. Now, will they be able to keep it up forever? That's an interesting thing, because they farm this data from the open web, and regulations may be coming.
For the non-technical folks, what is Copilot?
Sure. Backing up for a second. Copilot. In most IDEs, you have some form of completions. You've got like suggesting method names, names of functions as you're typing out. Here's your variable. You hit tab or whatever the button might be, and it writes it for you. There are slightly more sophisticated examples of this in like Visual Studio, for example. They call it IntelliSense, and IntelliSense can give you snippets for completing common functions and whatnot, but none of it's catering directly to what you are within the context of what you're trying to write. It doesn't care about the context. It's just, this is what we think you might want to type. And then they've started moving toward more sophisticated versions of this. Like IntelliCode was the first sign of this that I've seen in Visual Studio specifically. It started out a few years ago, but it's all been a human hand-coded effort for common scenarios. When they started applying Copilot capabilities, which is farming source code data from public domain projects across GitHub, now it's able to actually look at the context that you're in and go so far as you write a comment, a code comment, and tell it, oh, this is what I want to do. You make a new line, and it may be able to complete, a for loop with a complicated expression in it for you. And the capabilities just keep getting, branching out from there to the point where they're putting conversational in side panels. You just put in a question, describe what this class does. It can incorporate that into the model and figure out, here's an answer to your question. Here's what this class does. It, helps authenticate a user against an OAuth website or something.
How much detail do you have to give? Like if you're asking it to, create a Blazor page, can you just give it a couple lines, a couple words, or do you have to write full sentences? How intuitive is the tool?
With the LLMs, with the large language models, you're really at the limits of the scope of the model. So if you were talking to GPT-4, which right now everybody, is saying it's kind of the latest, greatest standard for this system, you don't need to give it much incentive at all. In fact, you can actually, tell it to be less wordy in its response. It's just being intentionally verbose sometimes. You can say like, okay, I need a Blazor page that handles a button click and calls a method, and it'll write up a page. It'll give you, it'll meet the needs that you gave it. And the more detail you give it, the closer the answer might be to what you're looking for. And then, oh, okay, well, it calls a method. Well, I can swap that out for whatever I'd like. And if its answer is not good enough, it's conversational. You give it, some more input saying, well, that's not quite right. You did this wrong. And it'll apologize to you, and it will go ahead and tell you how maybe you should change things based on what it did. Now, from what I've seen, another area where it's really useful, documentation. We do a lot of .NET here. You could give it it's a utility function of yours that you're going to make available in the library, and you could say add XML documentation to this, and it will look at the function. If it's got enough context in there, even if it doesn't, it'll make a slew of assumptions, but it will put in that comment for you, whether or not it makes sense. And you still have to make a human judgment, but darn, that's a lot of busy work potential.
Yeah, and I think that's where the key is right now for everything with AI is it's all still just a very powerful tool. It helps people like the three of us, if we're documenting something, get all that extra human interaction piece in there, and we can just adjust the fine technical pieces. It can help us create the shell for a method or subroutine, but we still have to go in and fine tune it and put in what we've learned in our decades of software engineering. So it's still just a great tool. That may change over the next few years, who knows? But there's still always going to be the need, in my opinion, there's going to be the need for the human who can actually work with that tool best. Jeff, you had another comment?
Yeah, there's two things that, I'm really hopeful with tools like this, and I know Visual Studio has their own kind of version that they're pushing. One, to help software developers, learn a new language or perfect a language, or, as C#, the new versions come out, there's new syntactic sugar and new ways to do things. And so I'm hoping that some of these tools can help onboard developers to how to do things, not only with existing languages they know, but learning new languages. The second is code review. That's a big thing for us. Is I'm hoping that some of these tools can get pretty sophisticated and review code and say, hey, can you describe what this block of logic is doing? And then from there, okay, review it. Is it doing what you think it should do? Is it working correctly? It's really hard to communicate sometimes to developers or non-developers what this is doing. So I'm really looking forward to the future and the capabilities of what this can offer us.
All right, gentlemen, I'm sure we could talk AI all day long, but unfortunately we've got other things that our listeners are looking for. Cody, I'm going to start this next one off with you. There's been a lot of talk at ProShip about OAuth and OpenID Connect or OIDC. Can you tell us what's the difference between OAuth and OIDC?
Sure. So OAuth has been around for quite some time now. It's to the point where it is a standard for authorization. It's the open authorization standard. It's going on, I believe, second major version. It's like 2.1, depending where you look. And it describes a standard for authorizing one service to get access to resources provided by some other service or system. And they have a list of what they refer to as flows that describe, okay, if you're a human being interacting with the system, this is how you do it. If you're a machine talking to another machine, this is how you do it. Taking that as a starting point, okay, well, these flows are great. What are some, can we agree on some specific ways to implement this? And that's where OpenID Connect comes in. It gives you a kind of not a totally cookie cutter, but a bit of an opinionated approach to it, so that two OpenID, and that you declare this as part of the OAuth flow, two OpenID Connect systems can negotiate, okay, you're OpenID, I'm OpenID, okay, here are the claims for this particular person or entity trying to authorize against the system. These standards taken together represent a lot of answered questions when it comes to implementing the system and adding authorization to it.
Cody, could you give us an example? Let's say somebody is using Active Directory hosted on Azure, and we want to connect into their network and authorize ProShip to communicate with their WMS, or the WMS to communicate with ProShip. Sorry, other way around there. Could you give us kind of an example as to how that would look from an implementation standpoint through OAuth and OIDC?
Sure, but I'll also add something else into the mix here. So these other authorization providers, as they're called under OAuth, they follow the protocol. They may have a slightly different implementation opinion for certain aspects of those calls. Oftentimes, it's in the case of ProShip, we elected to go with, okay, we're going to cater to one auth provider set of opinions. And in our case, it's Auth0 or Okta. They're both effectively the same company at this point. The nice bit about that is, okay, customers using Azure AD, well, there is documentation for days and days and days on, if you are using this for your systems, you can hook those up with the provider on the Auth0 side, following these directions, very straightforward, and then it will then forward the request to your system and handle the OAuth and OpenID Connect side of things with ProShip.
So what you're saying is that because we have both these components, OAuth and OpenID Connect, ProShip can use that Azure Active Directory to authorize that person has access to use the ProShip functions, or that WMS has authority to use the ProShip functions. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
All right, let's ask one more thing, because we know we're going to start hearing more about this as we start to roll out. One of the things that ProShip Sales is starting to talk a lot about is Auth0 Enterprise Connection. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
So their enterprise connection feature is, as I was describing before, where you've got some other system that speaks an authentication protocol, Auth0 in this case. In this conversation context, we're talking about OAuth. Auth0 has configuration for that. You pull up the page for Azure AD, you go through the different steps, you configure it following those steps, and like if you want to do like filtering on the users that are available through it that can actually access the destination system, that's all within the realm of the documentation, so that you can, okay, well, you've got ProShip running in your network and you want it to be using your systems, like this specific, what do they call them, security groups in your AD. You can filter the users down to just that. And it's a very similar process as the things like LDAP. For those who are familiar with LDAP, it's just another way of using that system. But by using Auth0, you can add any number of these enterprise connections as well, as long as they fit within your subscription to the service. So I think 3 is like the starting point for the paid services, which most companies aren't going to be using more than 3 different identity providers within their particular infrastructure that they're going to want to wire up to this.
I'm going to throw out an analogy and you tell me how well it works or if it needs to be broken down further. So it sounds like that these technologies combined can basically give us kind of a single sign-on solution, not only for users, but for applications as well.
Yes, by choosing OAuth, by choosing OpenID Connect specifically, and by targeting Auth0 and Okta, which are pretty much the market leaders in this area today, we have a solid foundation for getting the status quo with ProShip and authentication was very, very, very limited previous to this. Very much like, oh, here's your database and here are your users and you're all on-prem and hide it behind the firewall. But if you want to hook up an enterprise system for authentication, this is an excellent foundation. And as we get further and further into adding authorization capabilities into ProShip and extending it to users and roles and scopes and claims and all these other words that are used in this domain to talk about auth, the potential, we can focus on what does the business need out of ProShip and how are the users going to use our system and make it easier to restrict and control those things, instead of us becoming experts on running and hosting our own authorization process server.
Jeff, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so for me, I try to look at this, there's a lot of terminology and it's trying to reference this to real world things. And something I came across that was pretty helpful was the idea of an ATM and a bank card. So the ATM being the platform thing, the OAuth, and then having the bank card be your token, your access token, and so OAuth will get you the access token. There's 2 parts of this, right? So you have the OAuth part, which is the access token, and you have the OIDC, which is more or less information about the user. So you have like that part of it is like the badge. So if you look like a bank card, has your name, has an expiration date, some other information about you, and that's kind of like that's the OIDC part of this. And then you have the magnetic strip or the chip in there. That is more the access token, saying that this person can access this feature, and then along with that comes the information about that user. So you can't the OIDC is kind of it sits on top of the OAuth, so you can't use it independently. So it's another piece that is on top of the OAuth. So the OAuth is from machine to machine, right? So from one machine to communicate with another machine, but they added another thin layer on top of that, which will give you more information about that user. And like you hinted towards, Justin, that was the single sign-on. And I've seen that, you'll see that more and more websites, Facebook, you can log in using your Google account. And for me, I find that so much more convenient to having to create an account at every website. If they're all set up to use that OIDC, it's nice. You can plug in your Google account, say, yep, I can authorize it, I can access it, get me connected in, and I don't have to memorize 20 different passwords.
That's an excellent way of putting it with the badge analogy. If you look at okay, OAuth gives you the key, OpenID Connect tells you what the fields are on your badge. It says, okay, these are, we both understand what these things mean on this badge. Here's their email, here's whatever. It adds more color to the authorization situation, so you have even more questions answered on both ends of both parties.
Excellent. I am sure that we are going to continue to talk about this for years to come. As we can tell, this is where the industry is going. Next up, though, let's talk about carrier technology, because we know that is rapidly moving and changing. And one of the areas where it's changing is the fact that everybody wants more visibility on what they've ordered. And since a product like ProShip takes over once that label is created, and the customers want to know the rest of that journey from that store, that warehouse, that 3PL to them, let's talk a little bit about tracking. First, Jeff, I'm going to throw this over to you. Tracking has as it has evolved, we've kind of come up with the Amazon standard. Can you tell us what that kind of is? What is the bar by which all others are measured nowadays?
It's tongue in cheek, but knowing your package is delivered before it's delivered, right? That's the idea. The moment the Amazon driver drops the package off at your front door, takes a picture of it, you get a text message saying, hey, your package, it's right at the door. So within 30 seconds, you get a text message. If you have a smart device in your house that goes off and says, hey, package delivered. That's the goal. That's what everybody wants, for retail specifically. The technologies are finally getting there. We have, for a long time, the two base technologies that we have for tracking information and delivery is an API. So carriers extend an API, a tracking API, where you hit it with a tracking number, and then it'll return back the tracking information. The second way is a flat file. So we'd subscribe to a service or an SFTP site or something, and we would pull files down at an interval, and we'd process that data and it would contain
Now
tracking.
you're talking about from a retailer side, right? So we'd
Correct.
start with, for a small retailer, you start with the APIs. For a mid-size or larger, you move to file-based.
Both of those have limitations. The API, it only goes so fast. You can only, a lot of times there's limits on how many times you can hit the API, how many times you can track a particular tracking number. There's a bottleneck. You can only do so much. Even with the flat file, the carriers usually only post updates at an interval I think I've heard this close. The soonest I've seen it, it's every 5 minutes. And even then, still 5 minutes is 5 minutes too late. If they've already gone to the door, they've already picked the package off the front stoop, and 5 minutes later, they get a text message saying the package is delivered, that message is not very helpful to them.
We know one is really slow because your package has to wait behind a couple 100,000 to several million packages to be tracked every day. The other one is better. Flat files are a little bit better because, well, we've reduced the amount of information we're looking through. We're only looking for things that changed. So where is the industry going to go? How are we going to get more real time? How are we going to get that before your Ring doorbell tells you somebody's left the porch, that you're getting that text message?
We're going to use stone tablets. The new buzzword is, it's been around for a while, but webhooks, right? And it's a fancy word for an API. So the subscriber would create an API, and then the carrier would then push messages to that API. So every time there's an update, it's on a truck, it's ready for delivery, it's been delivered, all of those deltas, those changes, those new updates get pushed to this webhook. And then on our side, it would be just a queue, and we get all that information and we can process it. And the idea is that it's as real time as possible. So the moment that the driver drops it off on your stoop, plugs it in as delivered, that funnels through the carrier system, carrier says, okay, it's been delivered, pushes that message out to our webhook or the subscriber, and then we'd have that information as quickly as possible. And it's just the changes. So it's not the entire history of the shipment, it is just the changes, which makes the data as small as possible and as meaningful as possible.
So basically, if I'm hearing this right, what you're saying is, if I'm in an extremely rural area and the driver is using a device, they'll capture that as soon as they drop into the cellular area, that will get transmitted. And as quickly as the carrier's back end can process that, If they're using webhooks, it will be pushed out to the subscriber.
Pretty much describes it, yeah. Cody, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I'd say that's the gist of it.
I got to say, as somebody who grew up when the internet was still made noise when you connected to it, not having to track all this stuff that's not moving, to me, sounds like the best way to do it. Being able to subscribe only to the tracking numbers that are really important means that vendors are going to have options. Maybe you don't track every single thing. You only track for customers who are part of your loyalty program, something of that nature. Or you can track everything. Again, you have options. It does also feel like that as a retailer, then I must have a place to store that information because I'm not going to be able to look it up later.
I actually like to think of it. I think of it like a tap or a faucet. You know, it's like you can be running the water, but you need to hook something up to it, and having it available is great. If you don't always know what you want to do with it, or if you can wait for it, you know, it's maybe a queue. I love queues. Queues are great. Temporary storage. Don't burn disk if you don't need it.
Excellent. So I'm assuming we're going to hear a lot more about webhooks in the future. If you've heard it here first, we do recommend you look it up, as we do see, especially for tracking events, that this is something we're going to see a lot more of. But let's get to our last major topic, which is architecture. A couple of months ago, kind of under the radar, Amazon Prime Video mentioned that one of their components, a serverless component, they moved to a monolithic architecture. Now, many would describe ProShip as a monolithic architecture. And over the past 5 years, we've seen this battle between monolithic and serverless. Jeff, I'm going to start with you and then go to Cody. What does Prime Video's movement to a monolithic architecture for this one component tell us about software engineering in 2023?
What does it tell us? That the old is new again? Even the microservices thing, that's not nothing new, right? I mean, in the 90s, they were talking about that. It's not been, it kind of reoccurring. I mean, I had a conversation with another coworker, Jerry, about it, and he's just like, we talk about that, it's whatever is new is old again. It just kind of comes in cycles. But I think the ultimately, the difference between monolithic and microservices is scaling. I think, the difference is scaling either horizontally or vertically. Right, and I think that's where it comes into play for both of those have the pros and cons, and I think that's ultimately what you're talking about. And in this particular case, I believe it was just the fact that the microservice scaling vertically required too many jumps. Every service talking to another service requires you to serialize and deserialize, and it just, the overhead for that was just too great. So it's easier for them to group all that up into one container and just scale up with that one container, because even though every container has all of the features and it's everything, it was faster, and it was actually ended up cheaper than them scaling vertically.
Cody, did you want to add some stuff to that?
Yeah, everything old is new again is definitely one of my impressions as well. When you think of monolithic versus distributed architectures, never mind microservices is one application of it. Definitely goes back and forth. My favorite anecdote about it is you've got telecom and Erlang in the 80s, probably before that. The history of that whole programming language, it's distributed first, and it's amazing and wonderful when you can use it. Yeah, in the case of like Amazon in this situation, as an architect, as a developer with many years of experience at this point, I like to try and envision in my head, like, the thought process that they may have been following. And, commonly you try and think, okay, well, the simplest solution is the easiest, and the closest, thing to fit the situation that we're in today and the context of the code that we're running today is usually the right answer. So like in their case, if you're running a video streaming service, that's probably mostly microservices, and that's perfectly fine for elastically scaling out. Maybe everybody wants to watch the new release of a show today. So, oh yeah, we'll just tack on a few more microservices and everything will be fine. And, perhaps there was a little additional homework that hadn't been done yet, and they learned a lesson here. But it's not super surprising. I have a little bit of empathy for their position.
Yeah, so the reason this really made the news for a lot of business folks is because they saved 90% of their operating costs for this one piece of software. Now, where did that come from? It came from not landing the information to disk. Every time they landed the information, it cost them, not only in time, but in dollars. By switching to a monolithic architecture, they were able to keep that chunk of information in memory. And therefore, it could pass inside that exact same EC2 instance or whatever it was from one module to another. Sounds a little familiar, that somebody passing data from one module to another, from an orchestrator to a carrier, so on and so forth. But really what it comes down to, and I always refer to the analogy of what do you need? Do you need the Concorde or do you need a 747? There are a lot of times when packing more people onto a plane is really what you need. But there are also times where every transaction must be as fast as possible. You can do a lot with microservices. They're great. The world wouldn't be the same without them nowadays. But you have to put so much effort in the orchestrator of that. When you're building a monolithic solution, it feels like fine-tuning the orchestrator is such a key, vital piece that nobody misses it. It's a lot harder to just tack stuff on to the orchestration layer. Whereas in a microservices or serverless component, it becomes easier. Well, let's just add another 100 microservices. Well, what about that orchestration layer? How is it going to work? Jeff, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and it hit it right in the head there. The thing that I find funny is, the idea of a hosted or a cloud solution or service solution, it just means someone else's computer, right? So it just means Google's computers, it just means Amazon's computers, and they're going to charge you for every CPU cycle you use, every gigabyte of RAM you use, every megabyte of hard drive space you use. You're getting charged for that. So it's you have to, like you said, find the solution that best fits the problem. Sometimes when you're going on the route, everyone wants to jump on the new bandwagon. It's the best and coolest way of doing this, and it doesn't always fit what you need it to do. So it's making sure that you have the right solution for the right problem. It's pretty simple in life.
And Cody, as our architect, anything you want to add to that?
There may be some similarities in their end results architecture with ProShip, some long-standing architectural legacy, which it's good. We do a lot on one machine.
Excellent, excellent. All right, and with that, we're going to go to final thoughts. We've talked about a couple of different things today. Just a reminder for the audience, we talked about AI, we talked about OAuth and OIDC, we talked about carrier technology with focus on tracking. And of course, we just talked about architecture differences between monolithic and cloudless, and serverless solutions. So Jeff, I'm going to start again with you. Do you have any last minute advice or thoughts for our audience?
Just that I'm looking forward to the future of AI as our new overlord for humanity. Beyond that, I'm all good.
All right, and Cody, what is your thoughts?
Yeah, I look forward to finding out if the internet will forever be watered down by this process. Trending us towards idiocracy.
That's a old movie reference there, but I'm pretty sure all of us have seen that one multiple times. My thoughts as we look at this is we had a great opportunity to talk about AI as a tool. If you're not looking into AI personally, you probably should be. There may not be a professional, something for you to immediately pull into your business today, but it's definitely something where those who know how to use AI will soon be separated from those who don't.
It's a skill like any other. It's the prompting.
As we go forward, security and authorization continue to be one of the most critical things in the market. It's one of those things that ProShip is taking seriously, and we're moving forward with something that will help all of our customers, regardless of how they choose to secure their solution. Carriers will continue to make changes, and hopefully we will see more carriers leveraging webhooks, because we think that is the best solution long term for that ultimate user experience on delivery. And then finally, what's old is new, what's new is old. Both monolithic architecture as well as serverless architecture will always be here. There are reasons to use both. There is no one size fits all. With that, I would like to thank you for listening to our podcast today, our second annual Tech Month podcast. Thanks for tuning in.
joining us for another episode of ProShip ParcelCast. If you'd like to learn more about ProShip multi-carrier shipping software, visit our website at proshipinc.com or connect with a ProShip parcel expert via email at sales@proshipinc.com or by calling 800-353-7774. Be sure to subscribe to ParcelCast on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss any of our future episodes. And until next month, happy shipping.